Okay, so now we're going to talk about Bohr diagrams. The purpose of a Bohr diagram is to allow people to visualize the atom, what it looks like, in the subatomic particles, and specifically to show the placement of the electrons in an atom. So there are some steps to drawing a Bohr diagram. The first thing that we're going to do is draw a circle. And this center circle represents the nucleus. And inside we're going to write the number of protons and the number of neutrons. We're going to draw another circle outside of it. This is representative of the first electron shell. The first electron shell can hold up to 2 electrons. And remember that we said that the number of shells, we can tell how many shells an atom has by which row it is on the periodic table. So, for example, hydrogen and helium are in the first row or period of the periodic table, and they each have 1 electron shell. Next, we have the second electron shell. So if we have more than 2 electrons in an atom, we're going to draw another shell, which is our second electron shell. This shell holds up to 8 electrons. Then we'll draw a third shell if we have more than 10 electrons. So if we fill up that shell with 8 and we have electrons left over, we'll draw another shell, which will become the third electron shell. This shell holds up to 18 electrons. But getting into these full 18 electrons is more in-depth chemistry than we're going to get to. You would have to get into a high school or college chemistry class. So for our purposes, we're going to say that the third shell holds up to 8 electrons because it becomes way more complicated after those 8 electrons. So for our purposes, the third shell is going to hold 8 electrons. So how do we draw a Bohr diagram? Our first step is to determine the number of protons and neutrons. And we're going to write that in the circle that represents the nucleus of the atom. For example, if we're using aluminum, we draw a circle. Aluminum has, if we look at our periodic table, it has 13 protons and 14 neutrons. Okay, so we're going to write that 13p, 14n in the center of the circle. Our next step is to determine the number of electrons. And remember that we said for right now that the number of electrons equals the number of protons. So we have 13 electrons. So we're going to place the electrons in the appropriate shells until they're all accounted for. So the first shell has 2 electrons. So we'll draw our circle and add 2 dots. The second shell has 8 electrons. So we're going to take 13 minus 2, that told us that we have leftovers, minus 8. So our third shell has 8 electrons for the first few periods. And again, so we're assuming that that third shell holds 8 electrons. And there are 2 electrons left because 13 minus 2 is 11, minus 8 leaves us with 3. So there are 3 electrons left, so we're only putting 3 electrons in that outer shell. So here are some examples of Bohr diagrams. And these are for the first few elements of the periodic table, from hydrogen, helium, right, has 2, so hydrogen has 1, helium has 2. Notice that this is a full shell because it's only got the first shell, which can only hold 2 electrons. Lithium has 3, beryllium has 4, boron has 5, carbon has 6, nitrogen has 7, oxygen has 8, there's 9 here, 10, and 11. Okay? So what I want you to do, there's another video on Bohr diagrams that I want you to watch. And then also there's instructions on something to do at the end of the other Bohr diagram video. And then there's also an Edmodo quiz.